I will first maybe shortly introduce myself and telling what it's all about. Um, so I'm Anne, and I'm currently working on an essay talking about sound painting and about the impacts of sound painting on the on pedagogy. I'm studying currently in the Sorbonne University of Paris, and I'm learning how to be an artistic teacher, kind of. And as I have to write this essay, we've met a couple of years ago already, and during my study at the Conservatoire de Bervilliers, and I've asked you, so Walter, to join today to have this interview about you and about some painting, so that I could write a better essay talking about these two subjects. So maybe first thing you could maybe introduce yourself also, like shortly, and tell us, yeah, like who you are and this kind of
Yeah,
thing.
and also first to say hello, Anne. Good to see you.
Yeah, hello. Good to see you, Walter. Sorry, yes, of course.
Well, yes. Anyway, I'm Walter Thompson. Let's see what else. I'm a pianist, composer, multi-instrumentalist, piano, woodwinds, percussion. A composer in the traditional sense of writing things down. Also a live composer using the sound painting sign language. And yeah, and sound painting turns 50 years old this year.
Yeah, it's a great anniversary. That's true. Yeah, because so some painting was born, can we say, in 1974, if I'm right. Yeah,
That's
in
it.
Woodstock, isn't it?
Yeah, in Woodstock.
And could you tell us maybe the story behind the birth of sound painting back in 1974?
Yes, I gotten out of Berklee School of Music, where I
Yeah.
was studying all the instruments I play and composition. And then I went back to, I grew up part of my life, a good part of my life, back and forth from Florida to Woodstock, New York, from West Palm
Mm.
Beach to Woodstock every year. So I grew up in Woodstock, New York also. And so I went back to the family home in Woodstock and began my studies there in composition with Anthony Braxton, also in percussion with Steve Haas, and studied with
Mm.
Bob Moses for a bit, and Kala Perusia, Maurice McIntyre. um, so I was, bouncing around studying different things. The Creative Music School was there, started by Carl Berger,
Yeah.
and so there was a lot of musicians in town in 1974. In the summer, the school would let out. The Creative Music School would close. In the summer of 74, there were many musicians that just wanted to stay in Woodstock.
Mm.
And so I organized an orchestra. I had been studying with Anthony Braxton some months at this point. So anyway, I organized an orchestra of about 25 musicians. And I was always interested in having dance as part of it. So I asked about 7 dancers who are also
Wow.
there studying at the Creative Music School to join. And they basically were going to relate to the music, dance, not dance to the music, but relate to it, um, and dance, of course. And so, but just quickly backing up, I organized a group with 25 musicians and 7 dancers. I wrote small fragments of music for the first concert, and others wrote too. And I was the conductor. So for the first
Mm.
3 performances, we had been rehearsing, and the first composition was one of mine, had lots of little fragments. And the way the sound painting came about was that we would perform these, I was conducting the fragments, and then in between fragments, there would be improvisation, and each improviser would relate to the fragment somehow.
Mm.
And the first improviser didn't relate to the fragment. I
He
was a
plays the
trumpet
trumpet.
player.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so he did
Yeah,
not
I
relate
saw
to
it.
this fragment of music that I wrote as we had rehearsed this was what we were supposed to do. So I was a little lost, like in front of the orchestra, wondering what to do. But I had studied lots of alternate notation and composers who use colors to indicate things and graphic notation. So it was already in me to have another approach. So in performance, the first performance, when the trumpeter did not follow the rules, so to speak, of what to do in the improvisation, I I wanted to support what he was doing, so I just pointed at a few people. I said, you, and I made an iconic sign, hoping they would understand a long sign, a long sound, I mean, and said play. And that worked. And that was the birth of sound painting in a moment of sort of a moment of frustration.
Yeah, you were talking about graphic notations and creative way of composing. Could you name some maybe some inspiration, some people who were important to you back in time, like people who influenced you in your way of composing and of directing also your ensembles?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost was literally my mother and father. My father
Yeah,
was an
okay.
abstract expressionist painter, and my mother, super creative, and would just take me
Yeah,
around as a child, and we would gather junk and then
okay.
organize it in my front yard. The neighbors didn't care much about that, but my mom was, this 3 or 4 year old boy was organizing junk into a sculpture. So I would say my parents really were my first influence.
Right from the start, you said there were dancers also that took part to the very first performance back in 1974. Yeah, am I right? Yeah,
Yes,
there were seven
yes,
dancers.
yeah, and I didn't mention in my describing myself in the first part of this is that I also studied dance. So I was studying
Yeah.
modern dance. I grew up in a family of people that danced. My parents were good dancers. My grandparents on my father's side were chorus dancers on Broadway.
Oh,
So
okay.
dance on both sides of the family. So I was always interested in dance. So I studied modern dance
You studied dance in Woodstock
in
also at the
Woodstock
same
with
moment?
Ruth
Okay.
Ingalls,
Okay.
and studied at the Woodstock Playhouse. I started studying acting at 13. So I was always interested in multidisciplinary. I was always
Yeah.
interested in multidisciplinary composition. I just really didn't have the tool to be able to do it at that point.
Mm,
And then of course, growing up in Woodstock, there were many painters, and
mm.
I have synesthesia, where when I look at color, I hear sound or sound color.
Ah, okay. I
So
didn't know about that.
the idea of taking music in the way that we look at color. If we look at like a painting that's full of kind of browns and very various melting into one color, our eyes accept that sort of, just right away, and we don't question it. But a lot of people, when learning music, question what we call consonance and dissonance, which I don't hear at all. So I never had
Yeah.
any idea about dissonance or consonance. For me, it was all color, and all colors are useful. So so I always had that kind of as my background and was improvising from day one. At 4 years old, when my
Mm,
mother first taught me, I was improvising, and I just was always improvising to the point that it kind of would get me in trouble because I improvised more than I would read the music sometimes. So
mm.
at Berklee School of Music, we had this one class where we were playing the graphic notation of Robert Moran,
Okay.
composer that worked at different graphic notation. And then, at the same time, I knew about, Jackson Pollock, but also about Charles Ives and John Cage and Stockhausen.
Mm,
So all these people were new to me at that time, my late teens and early 20s. And they were all Earl Brown. They were all a lot of them were taking new directions in
mm.
composition. Meredith Monk,
Oh
working
yeah,
with
sure.
minimalism, her
Mm,
approach
mm,
with minimalism. And people were taking all these interesting directions in music. And so I was really interested in taking kind of my own path in a way at that point. So,
yeah.
so the idea, graphic notation always thrilled me because I was always looking for another way. Even though I read music, I was always looking for another way to read music besides
Mm,
just reading the notes. That form of drawing. Music is, when you read music, it is drawing. It's a type of
mm.
drawing. Well, I wanted to read another type of drawing. So I was very attracted to graphic notation.
Okay. And so would you say that maybe the name itself, sound painting, because when I once heard about sound painting, I was like, okay, so it's just about sound and visual arts like paints. And then, but I was a theatrical student at the time, and I was like, oh, okay, so as a comedian also, I can be a part of a sound painting group. So I was asking myself, would you say that the name sound painting comes from this, maybe from your synesthesia, the fact that you bound sound to colors, or to signs, like I mean on a canvas?
Yeah, it was, it was like in the 1980s. I had moved down to New York City from Woodstock and formed an orchestra in New York City, which is still together today. And my brother Charles came to see a performance in the
Mhm.
mid 80s. And my brother passed away, unfortunately, some years ago. But he asked me when we were like crossing Broadway and 86th Street, in Manhattan. He had seen the performance the night before, and he said, "Do you have a name for this?" Now, my brother Charles probably also had synesthesia. So he just, and our father doing abstract expressionist painting, he always had music on, all types of music. And he would, finish a large 2 meter by 2 meter painting in one evening,
Mm.
expressions, painting, improvising. My brother Charles had seen me do certain movements with the signs where it reminded him of the motion of my father, how much he,
Ah.
although the name is a little bit misleading, it's, of course, we say what's in a name, right? So our brother named it. He said, well, as we were walking across the street, he said, "Do you have a name?" I said, "No." And he said, "Why not sound painting?" And I just said, "Okay." Uh,
Just like that.
just like that, why not? I didn't have a name, and the language at that point was not well developed, but well enough to be able to really use it effectively
Mm.
in performance. Uh, yeah, and today the name, it can be misleading. It's, some people think that it's there's other methods that are painting to sound, but this is not what that
Right.
is. It's,
Mm.
as you know, as everybody knows, it's the name of a sign language. It has nothing to do with painting or sound.
You talked about Anthony Braxton a couple of minutes ago. Have you met Anthony Braxton back in the Berklee School? And is it the reason why you choose to study with him specifically afterward in Woodstock? Or how come that you were in touch with him? Like, because I've heard about the National Endowment, like the fund that you had to study in
Yes,
Woodstock. Yeah.
right.
Are you the one who chose to study with Anthony Braxton, or was it kind of, how was it bounded with the Berklee School of Music?
Well,
Was it even or not?
yeah. So I was living in Woodstock, and
Yeah.
you know, of course, working all the time, composing and studying with some other people. Um, and I had heard from somebody that I knew, a musician I knew in Woodstock, that Anthony Braxton was moving from Paris to come back to the United States after being in
Mm.
Paris, if I'm saying this correctly, being in Paris with Circle, a band with Chick Corea, Anthony Braxton, Dave Holland, and Barry Altschul. And
Um,
I heard that record before I knew anything about Anthony coming to Woodstock. And I was so
mm,
inspired both by Anthony's composing and his playing and Chick Corea's playing. I'm a
sure.
pianist, and but I also do play woodwinds, and I was practicing all of those instruments all the time.
Mm.
I was inspired maybe a year before by Circle, the group Circle, and how that was more in line with my approach to music, because it was
Okay.
much more different. There was different ways of looking at composition. They were coming from more of a contemporary music background, contemporary jazz, contemporary music in general. So when Anthony moved to Woodstock, I just called him on the phone and got his number and called him and said, "I want to study with you." And he said, "I'm sorry, I don't teach." And I said, "Well, you have to teach me."
Okay.
And he did.
Ah,
For 8
okay.
years, on and off for
Okay,
8
so
years, because he was touring a lot, and
mm,
he still does, but he was touring an awful lot, and so I studied with him on and off for 8 years.
okay. And when you said that you studied also with Steve Haas and Bob Moses, it means that, because I'm not sure how old they are, but like, were you all students of Anthony Braxton, or did you
No,
also like
no,
learn
Steve.
drums?
No, I had heard about Steve Haas. I think he played with some very well-known jazz musicians. Could have been Chick Corea. Um,
Yeah.
so I knew he was a
I
very
think Bob
skilled.
Moses played with Chick Corea. I'm
Bob
pretty sure
Moses,
Bob
yeah,
Moses
very very well-known drummer. I don't
played
know.
with Chick Corea.
Steve Haas didn't record very much. He at the time he told me he kind of didn't believe in recording.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
he just believed his music should go out in the air and just remain traveling in time and never be captured on a disc of any sort. So there's not many recordings of Steve Haas, but Bob Moses there's a lot. So yeah, I studied percussion with both of them, And
Okay.
also before Anthony, I'd studied with Kalapurusha Maurice McIntyre, a wonderful tenor saxophone player and flutist
Oh,
who had played with lots of different people, well known at the time. So I studied with him for just a month or so before Anthony got there.
okay. And so that was no more in the Berklee School of Music. That was already in Woodstock.
That was in Woodstock. Yeah, Berklee
Yeah.
was classes.
Well, how long did you stay
Yeah.
at the Berklee School of
Well,
Music?
I'll see if I can tell this in a short way.
I know the
A,
story is
a
complicated.
truncated version.
Okay.
I went to Berklee School of Music in whatever it was, 1970, something like that. And I was in the performance program.
Yeah.
And I had already been playing gigs since I was 12 years old, and playing bar mitzvahs, friends' bar mitzvahs, and things like that, little parties. And I started piano at 4 and graduated to other instruments. While at Berklee, after the first year, I was bored with the how
Mm,
fast things are moving. I was a young man. I wanted it to move really fast. I wanted to get to things. I
mm,
didn't want to wait for counterpoint or for arranging courses, which were going to be like in the first part of my end of my second year or something like that. So I was frustrated, and I found out I could join the private study department at Berklee,
mm,
and I asked permission and to the administration, and they said yes. But I needed to get a note from each one of my teachers, and I did, and they agreed. Yes, Walter's advanced enough to jump ahead here, and I would be out of the diploma program,
yeah.
so I
Okay.
wouldn't get any kind of diploma from this. This was studying in the private part, which was taught by students in their fourth year. So I tried that. I got the people signed and said yes, let him go. And then I went back to the administration at Berklee with all the signatures, and then they told me no, we're not going to let you. And I was really shocked because they said they would. So then I said, I'm sorry, and I enjoyed my first year up to this point. It was 2 weeks before the year was over, and so I walked out. I quit right then and there, and I really wanted to go to Berklee because they had the information, it's just not in the order that I wanted it. And I was impatient. And so I had my brother Charles go to Berklee and sign up using my middle name and my last name in the private study department. And for the next 3 years, I went back to Berklee as a different person under a different name.
Okay. So under your middle name then.
I used my middle name,
Mm.
McKinnon. And so for 3 years, I was McKinnon Thompson. And nobody knew me at Berklee anyway, because I was a little bit of a pariah, because I was more interested in Cecil Taylor than in,
Mm.
like the straight ahead bebop pianist, which I love, but that's not what I was interested in as far as playing goes.
And do you remember with like some people that you studied with back in the Berkeley, like in the first year
Yeah,
where
yeah,
you
John
were
Laporta. John Laporta
okay.
was one of the really well known people at Berklee. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the person that ran the percussion ensemble where I played piano and conducted and played timpani and other instruments. And that was the one that had the graphic notation of Robert Moran. I just remember
Mm.
John Laporta, but Gary Burton was there. I didn't study with Gary Burton, but these people were there at that time. It was a very rich time,
Yeah,
but I don't
yeah.
remember any of the other teachers though.
I would like to ask you some questions more specifically about your work as an educator now. So, because besides, so you've created the sound painting, you are also a musician, obviously, um, but you are also an educator, and I know that it's something pretty important in your career, and because that's how we met also. And I would like to ask you, like, when did you first began to be an educator? Because the question is more or less like, how did sound painting as a language, how did it influence your work as an educator? What is the place of sound painting in your work as an educator? How would you describe it? How do you use it? What are the possibilities that sound painting gives you as an educator?
Well, yeah, you're right in saying I definitely have a passion for education. I started teaching when I was 16. I had a
Oh, okay.
few private students I would teach, instrumental lessons, and And then, of course, I taught a bit in Woodstock when I was there studying with Anthony Braxton. I also had my own students. Um,
Okay.
and you know, creating sound painting in Woodstock, I didn't do much with it. It wasn't until I moved down to New York City in the early 80s, 1980, 81, that I started to like I created an orchestra there, and I started to use it in the orchestra, and they encouraged me. They liked what I was doing with it, and they encouraged me. And it was, and so maybe, you know, and I was teaching at several different, you know, schools in Manhattan, the Lighthouse Music School for the Blind, where I'd specialized in teaching blind people music, and also the Greenwich House Music School. But I was, you know, it was like maybe it was, you know, some of it was like workshop, and some of it was one-on-one lessons. But I wasn't thinking about using sound painting. It wasn't a part of my approach to teaching. Even
Okay.
though I had a workshop, I wasn't using sound painting in it. Today I would, but then I didn't. I would say it was the 1990s. Sound
Mm.
painting had gotten to the point that it had really grown into a composing language. Early on, it was guiding improvisation with the signs. And then later, as it grew up, the language grew up, it became a real hands-on composing language. And at that point, I received money from the Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation, which included like education residencies. I received money to develop sound painting, and part of it included education. So I was in a way, you know, not forced, but in a situation
Yeah, I
where
get
I
it.
had to really bring sound painting to the classroom. I had
Okay.
already started to educate a few people how to use the language, Todd Reynolds and Sarah Weaver, most notably. And but I didn't know how to teach it. So I got in front of the classroom and I started, you know, teaching and started really honing my skills on what the language would do in the classroom, whether it was a music class or just an everyday classroom. And I started to, I understood that was a really good language for, because there's no mistakes in the language. You know,
Yeah.
we always say in sound painting, wrong and strong, you know, or when you're not sure what to do, keep doing what you're doing. You know, just always be comfortable about what you're doing. And so with that sort of, you know, foundation going into a classroom, and as soon as the students would kind of understand what's going on,
Mm.
how this works, their creativity would just pop out, you know.
Yeah.
You would start to see what would start off as a timid class after some time, not that it became raucous by any means, but what it became was they were offering lots of ideas that were coming directly from them. So, you know, to round up your question, I think that what sound painting does is it first of all, it's making art with people. That's what sound painting is. It doesn't matter what age you are, what, you know, where your standing is in life. It's making art with people, whether you're young or older or whatever. So once the students started realizing that it's all about who they are, they would really come out and you know, start to express new ideas, start to learn new ways of expressing themselves, listen to other people, building community in the classroom. They'd start to know something about somebody else they never thought about. I'm recognizing something about my friend because, or somebody I don't even know so well because, wow, look at the choice they made in point to
Mm.
point or some other sign. So it creates a very broad and rich, you know, creative environment where it's
Yeah.
totally safe to offer, you know, to each sign, um, with who you are, instead of me saying to them, play this, which is great too, but there is no play, there's no like play this exactly type of.
Mm-mm.
The signs have the rules, so to speak, but the underlying rule is no mistake. So if you don't
Yeah.
play the sign by accident, it's okay, you know. Just keep doing what you're doing and let the sound painter, the live composer, work with it. And once that's
Mm.
established in a classroom or a group, ideas just come flowing out.
I wonder how the school staff, how they react to some painting, especially in some classic school or conservatorium as we have. We have a lot of conservatorium in France. It's the main way of teaching music here. What's their reaction to some painting? And I know for a fact that the students tend to love some painting because it's something that allows us to freedom, actually. Like we can do whatever we want and there is no mistake, as you said. And did you ever have some bad reaction to some painting in some specific school?
And it's been for the past 20, 25, 30 years, I would say
Mm.
that in the classical music world, there's been much more of an interest of getting back to improvisation,
Yeah, it's true.
composers like Haydn would wake up and improvise for 3 hours in the morning and then write the things down in the evening. All of these great classical players were great improvisers. So there's been a need
Brilliant.
to get back to improvisation. So when it comes to the conservatoires from the classical music side, very open to it.
Yes.
Sound painting is taught. France is the country that has accepted sound painting the most. It's all over the place. I mean, in the beginning, it was not known at all, but France, as well as other countries, started to understand the merits and having like a safe environment for creativity.
Mm,
Sometimes, just to address the question about was there resistance? Sometimes there was resistance because people wouldn't understand really what was going on with the language, and they would think it was like the sound painter was some kind of puppet master who was
mm, yes.
controlling. And
Mm, mm,
may visually kind of look like that to some people, but it's not that at all. Um, so there was some resistance there, but there hasn't been very much resistance.
mm,
There was
mm.
some resistance for me in New York City when I started mixing dancers and actors, and there were a lot of people that supported this new hybrid or multidisciplinary approach to composition, and there were some that just thought I was crazy.
Yeah, I wonder. You just talked about the time they were in New York teaching music to blind people. I wonder if you ever taught, sorry, sound painting to blind people and how also, because it's
Well,
tricky, or?
you know, it,
Isn't
at the time when I was teaching at the Lighthouse Music School for the Blind, sound painting was a tool I used
Yeah,
in my orchestra. So I didn't. I later developed the how to work with blind people with
okay,
sound painting, but at the time I wasn't doing it with blind people. I was teaching instruments and jazz workshop there and things like that at the
okay.
school. But later, when I developed it, how it works, just simply said, was it could be like, when someone is deaf, there's somebody in the corner signing,
Mm,
like on a program on YouTube or wherever, there's somebody signing, or television show, someone's signing what's being said. And so if you have a good budget and there's blind people in the group, for example, then there usually is like a radio mic and there's
mm.
someone actually calling it whole group long tone pianissimo play, calling the phrase. And that works really quite well. I've done that. I've also had the less budget way where someone sits next to somebody and just whispers in their ear, you know,
Yeah, directly.
that was the
Mm,
low budget one. Uh,
yeah.
but it works really well that way. And it works extremely well when you turn that around and you put the person who is visually impaired or blind in front of the group. And now they
Sure.
use the language to compose. So there is no need to see, you
Mm-mm.
know, to be able to compose with the language. So it's effective both ways. It works both ways as a performer and as a composer with the language. It's very effective as the composer.
Mm. And so with some painting, I guess you've had to travel all around the world to give some either some concerts or probably also some master classes. I know some painting is really well known in France, but I wonder outside of France, I've heard about Brazil or about Spain even. Could you name maybe a few places where you went to give some master classes or some workshops about some painting?
When I started teaching it to others in the 90s,
Hmm.
and then I started doing classes like, you know, um, other people started to learn it both as a performer and then also as a composer with the language. So today, there's a lot of people teaching it all around the world that have
Yeah.
studied with me or somebody else. But in the beginning, in the early 90s or the later 90s, um, I was really the person going around and teaching it. So I was traveling a lot thanks to like great sound painters, great musicians like Francois Chanot and Angélique Cormier and Eric Chappelle and others in France. I first started in France at the Paris Conservatoire Superior in Paris in 1999, and it just kind of blossomed
Mm,
out from there. But also, I was invited. First place I came to in 1997, I think, was Santiago de Compostela in Spain, an invitation from Dave Liebman and Ed Sereth to be a part of an organization of jazz schools from around Europe. And they got to
mm,
see all these schools, representatives from the schools got to see sound painting. So that just opened up a whole line of work for me, including coming to the Paris Conservatoire the first time. So with sound painting, I was lucky in that I had this workshop in Santiago de Compostela because I was invited to Denmark and you know France and Spain and Italy and Germany, many other countries because of
mm,
this. So today, sound painting is really all over the place, from Singapore to Kazakhstan to Uzbekistan to Turkey
mm,
to many countries in South America and Central America, Canada, United States, Japan, China. I don't even know. Today I go and I just for fun I might Google sound painting and I'm really surprised like how many people are so good at it. I don't know who they are. And a lot of times if I'm not familiar with the language, I'm like, wow, wherever this is, these people are using this language, both in
mm.
education and in performance. I don't have any real overall knowledge of where it is these days, but it's all over, it seems to be all over the
All over the place. And you created a couple of years ago this certification. I know that anybody is allowed to teach sound painting all around the world with or without the certification. Who created the certification? Is it you or like is it you and a group of people? And for what purpose? Like what for exactly?
It was I created it um,
Yeah,
several years before I then worked with Francois Chanot, and he and I took it another level of you know
yeah.
of of understanding sound painting and how the test was going to happen. The idea of certification is not this isn't like Suzuki or Dalcroze or Alexander technique where you're looking for someone who is certified in that method.
Yeah.
Sound painting is a language that belongs to any and everybody. I mean, I created it so many years ago now, but I really think a language can't be owned. It has to be just,
Yeah.
early on, I just kind of let it go. I did have protections on it for a couple of years, but then I just let it go. And then to a way to kind of help strengthen the base all the time was to start certifying as a way for you, the sound painter, to test yourself what you know about the language. It's not
Mm, mm,
that you need that to teach. I encourage people that take 1 day workshop for 2 hours, go out and share it with people. Absolutely. If you're really studious and you want to really learn the language, like learning French or Swedish or Spanish or Mongolian or whatever. If you're studious, you're really going to like study the language and you're going to learn it. If you know a few words, you know a few words, and you can use that in however many ways you want
mm.
to.
Yeah.
Certification is a way to test one's ability, and
Mm,
that's
mm,
it. And it's now certification is given by me over Zoom is one way if you're in a country and can't afford to come to the 3 countries where we hold it, which is in France with Francois Chanot, in Germany with Sabine Vogel, and
mm,
in Spain with Ricardo Gassent. So
mm.
those are the people that certify with me.
Okay. And maybe we didn't mention it, but another way I would say, like to maintain the language, like kind of to have this possibility to share the language with people from all around the world. There is the think tank, like the organization of think tank every year. Uh, and I don't remember when was the first one, but maybe you can present, like, talk a bit about what a think tank is and when it was born and where,
Yeah, I had
and
this
on what purpose.
idea, like, that since I wanted to share the language, I had this idea back in the say 1996 or so of inviting people to come learn the language with me. So I was looking for a place to do this. At the time, I was back and forth from Woodstock to my apartment in New York City, back and forth. And so I went to the Woodstock Guild of Craftsmen, who was responsible for the Birdcliff Arts Colony in Woodstock. And I asked the director, I said, look, I'm looking to bring my orchestra up here and to build something so I can develop this language. And it just happened to be a time when that's exactly what she was looking for. So we applied to the Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation. I received funding for several years to develop the language and also to go into schools and teach it. In these days, and so 1997, I think, was the first one. They were sound painting residencies held at the Birdcliff Arts Colony for 1 month. So we lived at the colony and people came and went throughout the month. And I got to develop the language with all the disciplines: musicians, dancers, actors, writers, visual artists. Just people coming that had no background in performance. And then a body of people that were excellent in their disciplines. So it was a real mixture of working with people that coming from outside of a performing discipline or a discipline in the arts, to also people that were just coming in to check it out. So that was a whole month, an entire month in the summer of 97, I believe, or 98, I can't remember. But then we had 3 more of those. And then from there, I started to move the think tanks to Europe, and they're a week long. And the idea of the think tank is, now they're a week. The idea is to invite people. I invite people from all around the world who have experience in sound painting, different levels and different disciplines in education and in performance. And I invite them to share what they've been doing with the language, and for all of us to learn from each other. And then I usually mount some type of performance that I sort of kind of organize with them, or then I have a vision of what I want to do for the performance, and I organize a performance at the end of the week. But it's a geek tank. We geek out for
for a
we
week.
geek for a week, and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful time. We really explore, we challenge the language. We don't always get into developing new signs, but there might be new signs that people have come up with, and we share them. And the language grows like every language. If there's a word in French that everybody loves, like terrible. And for many years, that just meant something terrible. But all of a sudden, back in the 70s, and terrible, c'est terrible, it became something like, wow, that's cool. So language changes from, the usage of words change, the usage of signs and sound painting grow and change. So there is no committee guarding the language, so to speak. And so when we all gather together at the think tank, we share maybe some new signs we've come up with and new concepts, and develop a sign, and how we develop it in education or in performance, etc. It's a very rich time, and there's one every year.
I've heard about a dictionary, maybe somehow one day. I know you've been working on it for a couple of years already. And I know it's maybe off the table right now, but
No. I can say some words about. I'll say some words about the dictionary. The dictionary started as a glossary of gestures back in the late 80s, and my glossary of signs turned into, in the 2000s, 2005, 3, 4, turned into what I call the dictionary. I wasn't ready to. I've written 6 or 7 workbooks on sound painting. And I wasn't ready to publish the dictionary because the language wasn't ready for it. So I'm waiting for the right time. So now's the right time. And I've written the dictionary, the text is done, and it's just a matter of, I have to personally do all the photos myself with like a Photoshop
all the
technique,
gestures.
because I know how. I studied the American Sign Language in order to realize how to write about the physicality of making a sign. And then also, what is the best way to show that in a series of photos? I didn't want to use like a GIF or some kind of little video. I just wanted simple photos. So it would be something that could also be translated into a paper version. So when you do one sign like a long tone, you have to do 2 photos, one here and then one
Oh,
here, and then draw an arrow. There's some signs that one photo works, and there's some signs where it takes as many as 4 or 5 photos. I am almost finished with it. I'm meeting today with the web designer for it, and it should be launched, by May.
oh wow, already.
Yeah,
Nice.
because it's done in French. Francois Janot, he translated it into French, and it's going to be in German and Spanish, and there's people working on that. But I'm going to publish the English and the French right away. As soon as
Yeah,
it's ready to
okay.
go, I'm publishing. There's about 920 signs, but the language itself comprises, more than 1,200, 1,500. I decided to start with like 900 and something, and then
Mm.
kind of like a Wikipedia page where you can add on to it. So it's going to be posted first on the net and available through a website, and then soon after in paper version for people that want a giant book.
My question was because you mentioned the American Sign Language, and I wonder if there were at any point if there were a link between the American Sign Language and sound painting.
Not at all. And there became a link later when I started signing, um, because sound painting really came out of the need in the moment to do something. That was 50 years ago in Woodstock, and
Yeah.
also my study of contemporary music, where people would hold up cards that had a color, and you'd play the color. They'd hold up something that was kind of Jackson Pollock looking, play that, Um, so that's where it came from, as opposed to thinking about using a language. At
Mm-mm,
first, for me, it was just kind of the same thing as graphic notation.
mm-mm. Yeah.
This is
Okay.
symbolic of a sound, this is kind of symbolic of a sound. So they were more intuitive in the early days.
Yeah.
Later on, I studied the American Sign Language to learn how to write about what I do.
Yeah. It's hard to focus just on your life without talking about sound painting because it's really bounded and like because you created a lot with sound painting and it's a big creation. So you are a musician. You play woodwind, you play piano, and you play the drums also. But you are also a dancer and a comedian. And we've talked a bit about dance, and you told me about having working with Ruth Ingalls. Is it the Ruth Ingalls that is linked to Isadora Duncan? Am I right?
Yes,
Or
yeah.
yes, it's that person. And so you studied modern dance. Have you ever took part to a performance, like a dance performance specifically before creating the sun painting language? Or what is your experience, the personal experience with dance as a performer, I mean, as a dancer?
Well, I studied dance with Ruth Ingalls. I was mainly interested in choreographing.
Okay.
So I was
Oh,
not interested in performing, but interested in
ah,
choreography. I wanted to choreograph, like parts of mix, even back in the 70s, thinking about a hybrid work that I would also choreograph the dance. So that was the main reason I was studying, besides it being good exercise. That was it. I was really just interested in choreography, and I thought if I took classes in modern, that it would give me a sense of, movement and things I
yeah.
might like to do, and things I might like to choreograph, shapes I might like, and lines I might like to make. And Ruth Ingalls' class was technique and a lot of improvisation. To use the improvisation and the movement to then fix something for the choreography. That was kind of my goal then. Then I got kind of overwhelmed with my composition studies with
Yeah.
Anthony Braxton, and I slowed down on the dance until I got down to New York City, and then in the 90s started involving dancers in sound painting. That's when I came back to my work with dance.
Mm.
Same with theater with actors. I came back to that. I studied at the Woodstock Playhouse, you know, straight up acting classes, and then I was working with the Irondale Theater Ensemble as their
Okay.
music director for a lot of years. So I was always doing something with theater. There was always movement involved. So I was, even though I was, not using sound painting all the time, I would use it some in the theater, but not using it all the time. I really started to focus on those other disciplines in the 90s.
So you would say that both dance and theater really took a big part of the sun painting language first in the 90s. not before,
really first
even
in the
though,
90s, and
mm,
not really a focus of it before. Even though I would
yeah,
use things like, I would say to my group back in the early 80s, like whole group speak or whole group
yeah,
laugh or something,
yeah,
and use kind of more theatrical, interdisciplinary kind of signs. But
yeah,
then again, that's not any distance from music, because we have opera that has everything in it.
yeah, sure.
Theater, dance, the whole business. And Duke Ellington, or the Art Ensemble of Chicago, Anthony Braxton, Marilyn Crispell, people used to use theatrics as part of their work. So I was using that also in my work before I brought sound painting to dance and to theater and to the visual arts. In the 90s is when I really codified it for those disciplines.
Same for visual arts. It was more
Same for the visual arts.
from the 90s. Okay. And was it like your wish to develop sound painting for dance and for theater and for visual arts? Was it bounded to specific
The
people?
people that helped me develop, Marjorie Siegel and Gus Solomons, great dancers, um, Andrea Ariel, um, uh, great dancers helped me. Josh Taylor, Lise Walker from the acting end of things,
Mhm.
my association with the Arndale group. So I was surrounded by the other disciplines, and plus I knew how to speak in
Yeah,
theater language, and I knew how to speak in dance language
yeah,
and visual arts language. So it was quite easy for me to bring those other disciplines in. But the reason for doing it is, as a composer, I guess, maybe 200 years ago, 300 years ago, I'd be writing operas.
yeah.
But here I
Amen.
kind of looked at my work in a more operatic way. It's a hybrid. I see it directly related to opera
Yeah,
as far as a lineage from
that's
opera.
clear. Yeah, the link is really obvious,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
sure. Mm-mm. Have you ever studied opera, like the operatic music specifically, or was it more like somehow present in your life and in your global studies at the Berklee School of Music, or did you take specific classes about opera? Mm.
I had this, I don't know, this love of opera when I was like 16. So I was listening to Wagner, and
Okay.
I don't know why. I was also playing in a rock band then, a very like, heavy acid rock band. We were gigging a lot, but I also loved opera. And then there was the Who with Tommy, which was later turned into an opera. And there was something called opera rock in those days. So I don't know. I was
Yes.
into it when I was 16 years old. I was gigging a lot when I was 16, and went to Berklee, and I kind of, the opera kind of fell to the side. I never
Yeah.
really studied opera as a composer to write in that world. Often in opera that you have a choreographer and you have someone doing the set.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do all that myself, because coming from a background in each of the disciplines, I thought, what would it be like to be able to compose all of that yourself, including the visual side to the performance, like to also compose that, to do the entire opera, but in real time.
I would say, like, once again, you created sound painting because that's what you needed. So,
I think that's really a fair statement, because I really, for a lot of my life, I wasn't finding what I wanted, and I wasn't fitting into where I thought I could find something for myself, and I would
yeah,
get part of the way to where that was, but not all the way. So I'd love working with these people and doing this project, but it wouldn't take me all the way there, kind of
yeah,
like creatively. And in the background, I'm working on sound painting. And next thing I knew, the language, after 15 years, had really developed into a live composing language. And then I really started focusing on it. And I
yeah.
must say that I had, this was in New York back in the 80s. I was part of what's called the downtown scene. And so was a great live composer named Butch Morris, who
Mm,
Butch and I were competitors in a very healthy way. We weren't friends. We became friends later and got to share lots of uh, lots of same paths we were both on. having the same struggles, having the same successes, etc.
Mm, mm, mm,
But so there was very important that Butch Morris was in my life because I
mm.
had somebody who was he was developing conduction while I was developing sound painting. So there was a healthy competition.
A creative
Yeah, a
competition.
very
Yeah.
creative competition,
You
and
would nourish each other, probably.
yes, indeed.
That's a basic question, maybe, but who would you quote as your main influences? And I would ask you specifically as a composer, but also as a performer, or maybe globally as an artist, or yeah. And are they any different? I mean, are your influences as a composer different than the influences as a performer, or are they the same?
Yeah, one definitely feeds the other.
Yeah,
Always loved Chick Corea's work, you
yeah,
know, and
okay.
Cecil Taylor. And a big influence from Marilyn Crispell was a big influence of mine as far as piano goes, you know. And from the side and from the woodwind side, of course, Anthony Braxton, Charlie Parker, and people like that coming out of
Mm-mm.
bebop and coming Ornette Coleman. Cecil Taylor was just, you know, I sat behind Cecil Taylor when I was at Berklee School of Music. I went to one performance he was playing at the Jazz Workshop in Boston, and I went to see him play, and I sat just a couple of meters behind him, and I wanted to go home and quit piano after that. It's like, how in the world is he doing that? But that opened me up to that side of my percussion, and I brought that to the piano at that point. Marilyn Crispell, you know, Anthony Braxton, Earl Brown, great
Mm.
composer, John Cage, Ruth,
Pollock, Jackson Pollock,
Jackson
you've mentioned
Pollock,
already.
uh, a lot of painters, Arnold Blanche, who was a great teacher, who
Okay.
influenced me, Bruce Dorfman, another great teacher of mine. I studied at the Art Students League for some time. And so in my early teens, there were people that were giving me very advanced concepts in painting that I transferred to music. Charles Ives, a big influence on me. There's quite a few from the performance sides, it's like Anthony Braxton, Cecil Taylor, Marilyn Crispell. You know,
Yeah,
those
okay.
people really, really, Ornette Coleman, those people really turned my head upside down when I heard them.
Out of curiosity, what was the name of your rock band when you were 16?
You get the Fever Zone.
Okay.
If you look for Miami Rock Festival 1969,
Okay.
the Fever Zone, no, this Fever Zone, not the Fever Zone, this Fever Zone. If you look there, and I must say that whether this winds up in our interview or not, we played after the Grateful Dead. After the Grateful Dead.
Okay.
Which for like a young kid band, like we were older teens, was maybe not a good idea. So we're playing in front of, you know, tens of thousands of people after the Grateful Dead at the Miami. So you can see the poster on the
Wow.
internet, Miami Rock Festival 1969. If you put this Fever Zone, you'll find the poster.
That's
And
okay.
we're in there.
Okay. Well, yeah, you were like 17,
Yeah,
right?
I was 17.
Yeah. Wow. Maybe just to finish, what are your current dreams for the future of sound painting, and maybe also what can we wish you for the coming years for yourself and for sound painting and for the composition world, and maybe like more globally, like what's the future?
I guess two things for me right now. I'm focusing, I come back to my art. I've been more in the world of composing live with sound painting a lot of years now, and
Yeah.
took more of a backseat to my performing. Well, now I've come back to my performing. Um, so
Yeah,
as
we
a
haven't talked
pianist,
about
I'm
that.
out. Yeah, I'm out
Mm, mm,
performing more and recording a lot, and also mixing sound painting, like using one-handed signs to give suggestions of where to go with the improvisation, like guideposts for the improvisation. So I'm using the sound painting tool that way. So I think it's open form improvisation that's structured here and there by a few sound painting signs. Now, this is an area that I'm exploring more and more. So that's part of the development of the language, and also me as a performer coming out and playing more. So the future for me is seems to be quite a lot more playing as a pianist and working with groups, and also involving sound painting. And then also as a sound painter, as a live composer, I see. I would like to see the work. If I have my dream about it, I would like to see the work go deeper into education. It's
mm.
slowly but surely, you know, getting around. People are starting to understand. Here's a tool that actually really works well. Like any language, you have to learn it. If you know, it's not impossible to learn. You can
Yeah.
learn a little bit in a very short amount of time, or you can really dig into it. So in education, I'd like to see it find its way more and more into the everyday classroom
Mm.
for the children or whoever in the classroom to wake their day up with some creativity and then go on to doing other courses. But start off with creativity first. That's kind of my dream, to see classrooms begin with creativity, like it's a cup of creativity every morning. And
Mm-mm.
from the side of performing as a live composer, I really would like to have more opportunities to do larger hybrid works, larger multidisciplinary works, um, where I have some real time to develop a
Mhm.
piece. I'm really looking to develop, like in the late '90s, early 2000s, or no, late '90s, and performing it in 2000 was a piece Pexo, where I had months
Ah,
to
yeah.
develop it. You know, I had months and months to develop it, and nowadays I might have one rehearsal and then a performance, and I love that, and that's a
Yeah.
challenge, and it yields something else for the composition. But as a composer, I really feel the desire to get into larger works where I have more time, and then also to see the publication of the dictionary, of course, getting that out there and see what that does. You know, I had people ask me all the time, "How do you sign this? How do you sign that?" Well, go to the
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that would be kind of my wish, you know, just to see more and more people using it, and both in the professional world and in the education world,
Yeah.
and you know, seeing big countries like the United States open up with it, Russia, different large countries, China, opening up with anywhere, but just opening up with accepting another approach to fostering creativity, you know, in the individual.
Thanks a lot for your
Yeah, thanks,
time
Anne.
and for your answers.
You're very
And
welcome.
I'm looking forward to write everything that I've heard. And I'm really happy that we had the chance to meet a couple of years ago already. And
Yeah,
thanks
me too.
again.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks for the interview. See you soon.
Of course, see you very soon.